my quandary is the following, that I've been asked to make the concluding remarks. However, all of you want to go to lunch or out into the sun. So what do you do in this type of situation? Everything that's been profound has been said, I think. A lot of programmatic things, sensible programmatic things have been said. A lot of very inspiring things have been said. So again, I was thinking, what can I really do? What can I still say in this particular situation? What do I actually do? So I thought three things. First, I try and keep it short, which is why I'm standing here. Secondly, I'll try and rewrite history, which is why I took off my jacket, so that hopefully you'll remember that this was a warm conference room. And third, I thought, I'll just make it personal and share with you what some of my thoughts are on all of this. So there were various words that we were talked about. We talked about impact, we talked about success, we talked about passion. And then we also talked about, once or twice, about the word excellence. Let me just talk about excellence for a moment. Now, there are different ways of looking at that, and in a way we could spend time defining excellence in the same way that we try to define success and continue that. I think one thing that excellence is a rigorous commitment to do things better, a rigorous commitment to improve. It's not perfection, because obviously no one is, but it's a commitment to do things better. I helped introduce all of this. Sharing in the way of sharing the knowledge that you've accumulated, sharing the experience, learning in terms of learning both from yourself, from the things where we're not quite there, and learning from others. So how is this personal? Well, when I was trying to find a decision about where to go and what I would do, and what things to decide on, I knew three things. I loved ideas. I wanted to work somewhere where I could make a difference. And thirdly, I wanted to work where it mattered. And so I found myself in 1999 in a small country in the Caucasus, in Georgia. And it was a great country. It was inspiring. Things mattered. Ideas were there. But in other ways, it was very lonely. In terms of real access to ideas, I had two sources for the ideas. The first one was one that's familiar maybe to some of you. It was RFI, Radio France Internationale, that reported on what was going on in the Francophonie, and that was what I was listening to in the mornings and in the evenings as I was sitting in my apartment. And the other link to ideas was a very tenuous one. Do you remember dial-up? And the way it sounded, and how it was really the sound every time you went in, and then sort of very slowly things would build up on your screen, and that was the other thing. And I came back a few years later. In 2006, I started working in the job that I'll stop with in 2 weeks. And within the very first days of really working there, a colleague sent me something. At that point, I was out in Kiev, and I looked at the link and I thought, is that spam? I looked a little more closely and I thought, who is Ted? And then I looked at what it actually was Hans Rosling's talk, where I used statistics to make a case about development potential. And that moment, in a way, stood for a moment that changed everything. Because before, while I'd been in a context that was rich in terms of people I interacted with, it was poor in terms of the context. It was lonely in terms of the contacts to researchers. And then with the internet, it was a totally different way of working across 4 offices, everyone very quickly in reach through chat and other ways. So we could share and learn from each other there. We could learn from so many other people. So in the beginning, we looked at the World Value Survey to try and learn how they did things, and then we realized that some of the questions were absolutely not appropriate to context. And we looked at the Afrobarometer that some of you, I think, are using, and we took some of the questions from the Afrobarometer because they were incredibly good. And then when we later worked on social capital, we looked at the work that had been done on social funds in Bolivia and Ghana, and that informed our work as well. And when we were trying to find people that shared an interest, we went out and we found this man there on the internet, Richard Rose, and he came in and he gave a talk about counting people makes them count. Just saying how many people are in a particular situation gives them a voice and gives them a presence. And that's then something that we started using because we had learned it from them. He had shared it with us. And then most recently, just to give you a very specific example, we looked at one particular issue, and that issue was representation of women in parliament. And we found that in the Georgian parliament, only 6% of the members of parliament were women. And through the internet, we could learn something that actually surprised me. What's the country you think that has the highest percentage of women in parliament? Exactly, Rwanda, and it wasn't Sweden, and it wasn't Norway. And the next one was South Africa, with more than 40%. And actually, some of the countries where you assumed things where there were going to be lots of women in parliament actually had very, very low numbers. And so we got a much more nuanced assumption as we were going out and communicating our research, rather than blindly proclaiming that things were different everywhere else. So we could learn. And then we could share, because we could share that information back to citizens that were affected through the internet. We could share the information that 70% of the citizens in Georgia thought that this wasn't enough and that they wanted more women. And we could share that an overwhelming majority of, of the respondents approved of incentives for parties through party financing to bring women into the party lists. We didn't actually advocate for that. We didn't need to because there were other organizations that picked that up. Now these incentives are in place. So sharing and learning totally transformed. And once that excellence that we tried to learn from others and that we try to replicate in our organization and then share out again, once that worked, we found that lots of other problems melted. They evaporated in a way. Getting staff became so much easier because people wanted to work with us and were willing to work with us for a very long time for little money, et cetera, et cetera. Funding became much more easy. So why am I sharing this? Why am I talking about this? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, I mean, most of us have come across this particular story of the frog. Actually, isn't quite the way it works, but the frog Al Gore talks about in An Inconvenient Truth, that sometimes there can be catastrophic change, but if that change is gradual, people don't react. So we know that story, but in a way, we don't really have quite the same analogy for a case where there's a huge transformation that becomes possible, but because it's gradual, because it's sort of day to day or week to week or month to month, we aren't entirely aware of it, and it's sort of stepping back, comparing what was in 1999, the loneliness of 1999, and then the ability to actually access things in 2006. It's at that point that you see a difference. So that was one reason. The second reason was because I just wanted to reflect on how much we have benefited from that opportunity in the context of this event. Before the event, there was a planning committee that hopefully managed to put many of the things that you would find most interesting in this event into the program. Now, of course, an event with that diversity can't tailor everything to everyone. That's clear. But what I hope has happened, nevertheless, is that in the center of the event, there were the opportunities for sharing that responded to your needs and to what you want to take out of the event. And we had that with the e-exchange. Some of us had it over Twitter through this event, and I hope that we have that after this event as well. And even the debate that we had yesterday in this part of the room, maybe debates that you had in other places as well, about how can we use a peer review mechanism to ensure the quality, even that is something that wouldn't have been possible in quite the same way 10, 15 years ago. So it is an environment of really extraordinary opportunities for sharing and learning to contribute to excellence, but it does, of course, depend on something, and it depends in a very obvious way on both people wanting to learn, but also on people giving and giving their experience. And so I guess if I have a request or to make, it's really that the very obvious one that, I mean, it's not only sharing among the people here, but obviously also in the places where people don't necessarily have access to come to an event like this here. And I think from my point of view, as I see it, I'm the novice here. I'm the apprentice. I'm learning from you in terms about the TTI. But in terms of what I think I've taken out of it as a lesson was that what's going to determine, I'm just echoing what a lot of people here have said, what's going to determine the difference between something that's certainly going to be okay or something that's really going to be an overwhelming success is the extent to which you contribute and share your experience with each other. So, sharing my very personal view and my very personal story, I want to lead over to sharing my thanks and hopefully asking you to join me in sharing my thanks. First and foremost to the key organizers, including the planning committee, maybe Peter, if you stand up, and with the other, both TTI and planning committee. Could you please stand up?